Behold the Templar castle in Tomar. I have to say, in terms of getting a medieval ambience, this may have been my favorite castle in Portugal, and the fact that there were hardly any tourists certainly didn't hurt. The Templar castle in Tomar is one of the most formidable medieval fortresses in Portugal, and served a similar purpose as the Castle of the Moors, which we saw in a previous video, namely, to protect the border regions from the Al-Andalus kingdoms to the south. However, the Tomar castle was built in the 12th century, so around 300 years after the Castle of the Moors. One of the most interesting things about this castle, for me personally, is that it began as a Templar castle, and so belonged to the Knights Templar order. This is actually a rival order to the Teutonic order, which controlled castles in the Baltic countries, which I've made a separate video about. When the Templar order leadership was famously arrested on Friday, October the 13th in the year 1307, and eventually disbanded a few years later, the Templar Knights managed to survive here in Portugal, albeit under a new name. This is because when the King of France dissolved the Knights Templar, King Denis of Portugal refused to persecute the former Templars, as had occurred in other places. In Portugal, the Templars simply changed their name to the Order of Christ, and maintained their possessions in the kingdom. In particular, they maintained possession of the castle you're seeing in this footage. This famous event also makes clear another interesting point about the Templar military order, which is that, despite owning many fortresses, they were not actually a kingdom. Despite this, they controlled territories as far apart as this castle here in Tomar, Portugal, as well as, for example, the entire island of Cyprus in the eastern Mediterranean, all at the same time. This also shows how interconnected medieval Europe and the Mediterranean actually were. Unlike some of the other fortifications I've made videos about, this castle in Tomar did come under direct attack. In around 1190, 30 years after the castle was built, it was unsuccessfully besieged by the powerful Almohad Caliphate, which at that time controlled much of Iberia and North Africa and had succeeded in taking other less formidable fortresses. And unlike other castles, which decreased in importance after the border moved further south, this castle in Tomar continued in importance for several more centuries as it had become the seat of the new Order of Christ, the successor Templar Knights order I mentioned earlier. This is evident when we reflect how Prince Henry the Navigator, who was a major factor behind Portugal eventually becoming a global sea empire, had also been appointed as the Grand Master of the Military Order of Christ back in 1420, and had used funds from the medieval order to finance Portugal's growing sea expeditions into the Atlantic Ocean. During these years, the Tomar fortress and its environs were continuously expanded with the construction of 4 elegant cloisters, which you can see in this footage, as well as the convent's famous chapel, the palace, and later the aqueducts. The famous round church of the Castle of Tomar, which dates back to the 1100s, was modeled after either the Dome of the Rock or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is evident when you enter it. Fascinating stories exist about how the Templars apparently believed that the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem had once been part of the Temple of Solomon, but it's not completely clear what inspired the architecture here in Tomar. Around 1500, The architecture in the Tomar Castle Church was largely remodeled into the stunning Manueline style, which is a unique mix of late Gothic and Renaissance styles that is found in Portugal. The Tomar Castle remained militarized until the early 1500s, when Portuguese King John III demilitarized the Crusader Order. Despite some damage caused during Napoleon's invasion in the 1800s, this castle has remained largely unaltered for 500 years. Tomar is around 2 hours away from Lisbon by train and is well worth the trip.